Hey guys, it's almost an agreement time. Mr. Watson of District 3 and the school board is here. I originally asked him here before this judge thing happened, so we're not going to start with the judge thing, but we'll get there at some point, I'm sure.
I'm sure we will.
We're almost in agreement at gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, which we are live on right now. And if you are watching us live on YouTube, feel free to ask questions. I'll probably ignore you, but do it anyway, so it's because it's fun. Get us at almostinagreement.com. You can go there for all the available episodes. And we also have my city cheat sheet guide for the upcoming city election. That's almostinagreement.com/cityelections21. Any major podcast provider, we're on there. Please, while you're at any of these places, like, share, subscribe, friend, follow, retweet. Help us get the word out. That's the best way to get us to grow, so that we show up sooner in searches and stuff like that. So it's easier for people to see us. So help us out with that, and I don't know. We'll let the tune end, and we'll talk to Mr. Watson. Every time I have a guest, I'm reminded I need to get better cameras. Because I can't get them close enough to focus well, so it looks a little blurry. But it's all right. That's not what we're here for. It's not a beauty contest. Because I already won. Oh, these are the jokes.
Right.
All right. So I'd originally emailed you. I mean, it was on the mask topic.
Right.
But like I've been talking to some of the other school board members recently, and the mask thing's been coming up, and all the different stuff that's going on at your guys' meetings and stuff.
Yep.
And I was like, my thoughts on it personally, with no data, was that we have a couple hundred super mask people, a couple hundred don't want mask people, and then I don't know. 60,000 kids, probably averaging like 1.2 parents per kid, something like that.
Right.
Gets us to like 80,000 adults and a couple hundred of them making a lot of noise.
Right.
And so I heard rumor, at least, that you'd done some sort of polling on the topic.
Just through my school board email. So no official like polling, just kind of, I took a spreadsheet of all the emails that I was getting and in terms of folks that were wanting us to implement a mask mandate, those who were not wanting to implement a mask mandate. And I really started doing that probably back in, I don't know, maybe February earlier this year.
Okay.
So, yeah, so consistently up until September, about 65 to 75% of folks that emailed me anyway. And a lot of times when people email us, they do email the whole board, were in favor of strong COVID mitigation protocols, including masking.
Okay. So it's not as good at polling as I was hoping for, but that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, again, because I think I think personally, I think there's the two contingents that we hear of all the time.
Yeah.
But I think most of them are like me, that if I was enticed to pick a side, I might, but realistically, I'm just kind of like, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to anything, but I'm not for anything either.
Sure.
I'm going to go along to get along, for lack of a better phrase.
Right.
And maybe it's a little different for me because my kids are average students. I think they're at the age bracket where, they're third and a fifth grader. So it's not like hugely detrimental to their day to day.
Sure.
Although my younger does have some speech issues, which I'm not sure how that speech person is specifically handling that now that we're back in masks. But,
right.
I mean, at the end of the day, I don't feel like this is the end all be all either way.
Well, and I think there's a big difference between what we're experiencing right now and even what we experienced last year. The Judge Greer's order was very specific in that there was only 2 exemptions around tracheotomies and if you have autism.
Right.
Well, last year in our policy, we had a lot more flexibility for folks who had for students who had medical issues. And so I think that's where a lot of the pushback is happening is, hey, even with a mask mandate last year, my kid was exempted. Why are they not exempted this year? And that's directly due to the judge's order. So at this point, now Knox County Schools has filed a motion.
Right, I was reading that this morning, like 60.
Yeah, 60. Now, the trick, though, the problem with that is if every time you have a new exemption that you should have, you have to go file a motion, that's arduous to go back and forth.
Right.
And so I think what the ideal situation is, if the judge is going to keep the mask mandate in place, is that he allow us to use the exact same protocol that we had last year, where we were able to make the decision on exemptions based on medical issues and not have the list.
Right.
So,
but I guess, like, reasonably with the way this year has started, I could see how the judge would be like, well, you guys didn't really do what you were supposed to do, so why would I give you the authority on this one?
Well, but part of the reason why he chose those two is because if you read the motion, the doctor who came and testified on behalf of the defendants, those are the only two he listed in his testimony.
Right.
So the the judge picked up on that, and that's why he chose those two.
Right.
My assumption is if that same doctor would have listed 10, the
Right,
judge would have put all 10
all
in
10
those.
in. I get what you're saying for sure.
Yeah.
Because again, like I think it's a weird state of play. 'Cause I think one of the things, and myself included, and even though I tout myself as a little bit more informed about what's going on than others, is I think there was a good amount of this that we could have seen coming, and that I think that I always hate the phrase on where to place the blame, but I think it's important that it's clear, because when we come in election time, because not this year, but 22, when everybody who's involved in this conversation right now, maybe not everybody because it's an off cycle or whatever, but a lot of people who are actually in this conversation and have at least some skin in the game, for lack of a better word, politically, are going to be on this 22 ballot.
Sure.
And I think it's important that we, the quote media, I don't like to call myself that, but that or maybe a better way to say it is that we, the public, get informed on who is doing what here, because a lot of this came from the state level stuff in the transition into this year, where we went to the only having one set of virtual schools, individual schools couldn't do their virtual programs and stuff like that. So as all the state stuff got put onto the board,
right,
I think a lot of this we could have seen coming, and
we had less tools available for sure. So
because again, I put it this way, as far as like how I feel about the masking part or not is unimportant. I don't like what Governor Lee did on the opt-out thing, and then I don't like a federal judge coming in and dropping it either.
Sure.
And so it's just and you know, I know there's a whole contingent of people that aren't particularly pleased with the way the board is doing things now, but now we are 2 levels above.
Right.
And as you said, it's going to be real. I think arduous was the word, because we're using big words today, feeling good about ourselves. You know, it's going to be real arduous to make adjustments in the plan, because we have to go up through now we have to go through the court systems instead of, you know, all the other different
way less nimble
protocols in play. And so I find it unfortunate. I don't, like I said, I personally, like, I could see, like I was telling, who was I telling? I was telling Eddie Manis this the other day when we were talking, as a consequence of this job, for lack of a better word, I am in both the 2 major Facebook groups that are at odds right now.
Sure.
And so I'm reading up on them, and I'm following it, and it's, you know, there are some crazies in both groups that go way off the deep end on the other stuff, but as a whole, I could follow the reasonings on both sides here.
Sure.
Like, I could see why certain people, in certain situations, don't like X. I get it. And again, like you said, the lack of nimbleness is the issue here, where, you know, and even if it was on school level, on just the board level, we're a big school board.
Well, it's the lack of consistency too. I think
Right.
that's the other frustration, is no matter where you land on what side of the issue, the way we're reacting to the issue continues to change within the system. So, I mean, you know, last year for about 6 months straight, we talked about masks just about every meeting, and the board came to a decision in April. And that decision, whether or not people like it or not, was to follow the Tennessee Department of Health guidelines for this coming school year.
Right.
If we would have stopped there and just did what we said, people would still be upset, but I don't think it would be near as escalated if we would have just stuck with what we said.
Right, I agree.
But because it's been back and forth,
Right.
start and stop, I think that's added to the frustration.
Right, because midsummer, I'm sending my kids back. Like, you know, I'm not one, obviously, but there is a parent out there that really didn't like their kid in the mask,
Sure.
whether it was a medical or mental or just period. That was like, okay, well, you know, the kids are going back to school in mass, so I'm going to do what I need to do to keep them out of that. And then all of a sudden, right as school starts, it's like, no, we're not doing mass anymore. And so it's this jump back and forth. I agree. I think that is certainly added to the madness, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, no doubt.
Because I don't know, like, I don't know how to, it's one of those to be that, especially as we go higher levels of government doing this, is the slower reaction time to switch, I guess. I don't know. That one gets me. That's where I get caught a little bit. I get it both ways on that as well. Okay, so that's enough of math. Let's go on to something else. I mean, okay, so we'll just to kind of close it out, one of the questions that I'd seen kind of floating around in some of the Facebook groups is, what time frame is on this judgment? Like, how long are we under this federal mandate, for lack of a better word?
So at this point, and this is just the way the legal system works, right now, the judge has said, hey, this is going to go to trial. And so now when a trial happens, nobody knows that. I mean, in all likelihood, the earliest that might be the spring. Now, that doesn't mean in the meantime the judge can't loosen some things. He can do that. But right now, it's really all up to the judge. The timing of everything's up to the judge. Even the motion that was presented the other day around the 60 exemptions, it's up to the judge when he reads that and makes a decision. That there's not like, in 3 days he has to respond. I mean, he could respond tomorrow. He could respond in 3 weeks. It's up to him.
Okay. That's it's not non-conclusive answer.
Well, nobody likes the answer, but that's the answer. I mean, it's up to the judge.
I fully understand it. It's just, again, it goes back to now, if I were a parent who is super opposed to this, I don't have a time frame. Right. I don't have a time frame for, okay, we could put up with this for a couple weeks. We can do whatever for a period of time. But now it's like, well, do I need to pull my kids out of school because this is that important to me?
Right.
Or it's going to be a short-term thing and we're going to get through it or not. I mean, and again, I guess that all falls under the same thing as we don't know when this COVID thing's going to end in general. And so we've got to try to be at least a semi-flexible as individuals to deal with some of the...
Well, and that's, I think, the other hard part about the judge's decision the way it currently stands is there's nothing, if you read the 56-page decision, there's nothing in it that says when it would automatically be removed if it would be.
Right.
So let's say tomorrow COVID drops off the face of the earth and we have no more COVID in Knoxville, Tennessee. I mean, the way the judge is ruling is right now, we would still have a mask mandate. Right. And so that's the other point of clarification that needs to really be hashed out.
And I think a more reasonable example would be if the trend continues, because we're on a downtrend or whatever, and it gets to the point where the real conversation is about, I think it's time to come out of mask. We're going into winter where the flu season starts.
Right.
Which, if I understood correctly, last year we had the least impactful flu season we've had in decades in the school system. So the same judge's ruling, and I mean the same premise that could apply, and the judge could keep us in mask for flu, even though it's not a COVID thing. Is it specific? I guess that's a better way to ask the question. Is it specifically we're masking for COVID in the ruling?
Yeah, so because that was the basis of the defendant's case.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that helps a little bit then. But, because I was just going down. I just went down a rabbit hole there of other things that we could keep a mask for. And again, like I don't know, like it's you look at Japanese culture where it's normal. Right. Where like before COVID they'd wear masks when certain illnesses started kind of popping up, and I could see it as a net positive as we as a society got used to that idea and stuck with it on a voluntary basis.
Right.
It's these mandates that pop down and stuff like that I fully understand are problematic for a number of people.
Right.
But
well, and I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I really should say it's the plaintiff's case. So it's the plaintiff in this case is the parents. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the legal terms. We're not that specific. I knew what you meant. I guess is the important part. Okay, so all right, we're dealing with masks until the judge decides we don't have to deal with masks. That's where that's at. Yeah. I think like I think it's weird. I don't know. Like I'm trying to think of other, because I know we took the day off to try to build the policy and stuff on how to deal with the contingent that doesn't want to mask. And like I'm trying to think of comparables. Like, is there comparables as far as the policy structure around the mask thing in like a dress code or like other things that we have in place that are a similar set of policy that we're doing with the mask right now?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people make that comparison. The 4-point discipline around masks right now is the same that was in the policy last year. Okay. And that's because, again, in that 56-page judgment, the judge references our policy from last year. And so that's what – but the hard part in that is we can't do all of our policy last year because he named 2 exemptions. So it's kind of a catch-22. We're implementing the policy, but there's parts of it we can't implement. So
okay. Because, again, I think, like, I don't – well, one, you're under 18 for most of them.
Right.
And I don't know. Like, I don't – like, you're a student in a school. You don't have the same rights as an adult. I mean, that's just that's how I feel about that one particularly. Like this infringement of rights things argument is a little weak to me.
Well,
which be the libertarians like, sure, 16 you can drink and smoke, it's fine with me.
Sure.
But like I just don't I don't buy it as a valid argument to this particular one because we have 1,000 little things that have been in place for years,
right,
that nobody cares about.
Exactly.
And it's just that this is a hot button issue, so I'm going to make it a hot button issue.
Yeah, you don't see. I mean, maybe it's not the greatest simile or metaphor, but you don't see anybody protesting about dress code, right? And that is a.
I mean, there were some hot girls that didn't get to dress the way I wanted to when I was in high school.
No, I'm just saying, like, you go dress however you want in your home, but at school you're gonna have to dress differently, right?
Right.
Like, we're
used to that, right?
Right.
And I agree with that. And I want to say I read a story. I want to say out of Texas where a school system made the mask part of dress code, and so they just implemented it that way, so that it wasn't a separate thing. It's just like, this is not part of dress code.
Put it within the policy. Yeah.
And so that was an interesting little subversion I'd heard of, but I don't know where our policy sits on that, whether we could tweak it that way if that's what we wanted to do or not.
Yeah, I don't know. So I wasn't on the board when the original mask policy was developed, so I don't know if that was a part of the original conversation, whether or not to put it in there or not.
Right.
So,
but anyway, fun stuff. Moving on off of that. Okay, so I don't know. Like, I'm tired of the conversation in general, and I would like to get past it.
Me too.
But and I guess that's the reality to me in a lot of the conversations I have. I was talking to, again, referencing Eddie Manis the other day. It's like, outside of COVID, outside of masking, outside of this particular thing, is there any air left in the room for any of the future conversation? Like, what are we doing about, like, normal, real things instead of this thing going on?
I think the board is putting the right emphasis right now on the conversation around our superintendent search. I mean, Bob, I think, just announced about 20 days ago, and we'll likely make some formal decision about that this coming week at our next board meeting. So,
the conversation is, there's a consulting firm we've used in the past.
Well,
or
not
that
we've used in the past, but one that we could use because we're already a member organization of that firm. So that's TSBA, the Tennessee School Board Association.
Right. I was reading on that. Earlier. Or it's to go out and put out a request for offers,
proposals.
Right,
yeah,
proposals.
Yeah. But we have a third option too, which is we don't use an outside firm and we run it completely internally. That's what happened in 2017. When Bob was hired. So when Bob was hired, it was a completely internal process. There was no external firm.
Okay, so what is is there a set criteria, or is it just the will of the board on what makes the superintendent? Like, is there actually a job requirements page in, I guess it'd be a state handbook somewhere?
Yeah, so there are definitely some state statutes. So one of the statutes related to it is you just have to have a degree, which is interesting for a superintendent. It's not a degree in education. It's not a bachelor's. It's not a master's.
I'm pitching a lawyer. I want you guys to hire lawyers so we can sue the state for more of our money back.
Right, yeah. So there is some state statute that guides that, but by and large, it's up to the school board to determine. Now, the school board could go internal and decide that all on their own, or we could go external and say, hey, let's try to hear from the community about what their priorities are. Other people in the district, community leaders.
Community lawyer. Get a lawyer.
Yeah.
Get a good lawyer that could sue the state over and over and over again, at least out of attrition.
Right.
And get some more of our money back in the BEP program.
Yeah, there you go.
That's my plan. That's what I got.
Right.
Because I don't know. Like, I'm curious. Like, what would make a good superintendent? Like, I guess the better question is, what's the job? What is the more specifics of the job, and then what person would hold the attributes to do that well?
Yeah, so I think you have to have somebody who has a basis in education. I think if that's their only background, I don't think that's appropriate. Knox County Schools is a large business. I mean, it's a large system. It's 60,000 students. It's 8,000 employees. It's a $500 million budget. So you need somebody, in my mind, who knows how to lead at that level. And that's not going to be, no offense, that's not going to be the manager at your local fast food restaurant. It's not
fine. I was going to accept the application process right here and now, but I guess I'm not good enough for you.
It's not going to be the person who has been just a teacher for the last 10 years. Although that, I think, skill set is good because you need to know what happens in the classroom. But we need somebody who knows how to run that level of an organization, because it's a different skill set.
Right. And so I get like, how much is direction of schooling through the superintendent, or is it more through the board, or is it some combination thereof, and that's an attribute you look for? Is
so it's
working withiness.
To me, it's kind of two sides of the same coin. So the superintendent has all the responsibility for operations management day to day. The school board's really only major tool is policy, and so we can set overarching direction through a strategic plan, through policy. but it's going to be completely up to the superintendent to execute on that day to day, which is a different function too. And I think sometimes people get confused to that. I mean, I get a lot of emails that ask me about operational things in the system.
Right.
And although I will hear that, I'm going to direct that person to the person who can do something about it.
And that's the same deal as like the superintendent has to juggle board decision versus state action as well. I would assume, or is that more of a board level thing?
Well, yeah, and really our superintendent and our board are under any state action, so neither one of us get a choice in that. Now we should be in alignment as a superintendent and a school board in terms of how we're going to execute on it. But yeah, neither one of us get choice in that.
Yeah, and so because again, like I said, going back to the beginning, it's like that's the where to place where to correctly illustrate what the authority is on certain topics that I don't think the average person out there understands where a lot of this stuff comes from.
Yeah,
because I think a lot more this I didn't know this a year and a half ago. I mean, I think a lot more comes out of the state. Like I guess the best way to illustrate is my current joke is it's not Knox County School Board, it's Tennessee State Schools Knox County Branch. That's a more accurate title for what the body is.
Yeah, they set our guardrails for sure. The state does.
And so it's like, if you want to because one of the things is like I've been getting in different little Facebook fights about people getting on Mayor Jacobs about school board stuff or school stuff. And it's like zero authority, people, nothing. Yeah. He literally signs the budget that's handed to him that he doesn't really have the authority to really mess with much other than to say yes or no to the whole thing. Right. So unless it's a budgetary conversation about school, then Mayor Jacobs gets nothing. Now we could talk about like the feeling set by his public speaking and whatever. Like I don't like that as a thing in general, but it's not Mayor Jacobs' fault that we didn't have masks when school starts. Right. And if you're going to make that argument, I'm going to correct it. Yeah. Because if you want to get on that argument, you go after, I guess, Manis and Gloria Johnson and the whole set in the state house and the state board that is putting all these things into place. Well, maybe the masking thing's not an accurate one. I apologize.
Well, but I think it's a good point because I have heard people pointing the fingers, and the reality is, even though this is not a comment about Mayor Jacobs, politicians at certain levels, they do have influence. And so, I've certainly seen in my short time on the school board, politicians that really have no direct connection to what we do in local public education make statements, and I've seen the system sway to those, right? Right.
And I think that's what's lacking in the media in general is not correcting that, letting them get away with it, because I think that's like, I guess in the new age of social media and stuff, where Mayor Jacobs has his weekly little like video that he puts out or whatever, he does it. There isn't a level of oversight from a media body to say, hey, that's an inaccurate statement. Mm-hmm. But we could still do whole segments on a news station that says, hey, Mayor Jacobs was talking about this in his weekly thing. That's out of his depth. Because how are we as a public supposed to know it's out of his depth without doing it ourselves, which most of us don't have time. Right. And I think on a broader political issue, that's one of the major issues that we have as a society with our relationship to government. We don't know who we're talking to about what we're talking about.
We don't know who can pull what levers.
Yeah, that's a good way to illustrate it. And it frustrates me greatly because, again, like on the virtual school thing this year, like I think that's like, I could see it as a pro in the long term, and that there are groups of kids that are going to do better in virtual school long term for reason A, B, or C, whatever it is. And having a dedicated staff and a dedicated online school makes sense to me. But when we're not out of the pandemic yet, and when we know there's going to be stuff coming up to say the only virtual school is that school, right? And you have to enlist or enroll for perpetuity, basically, or at least for the entirety of the school year as a parent, that puts the parents in a hard spot because most parents want their kids to go to the school.
Well, and you can see, I mean, if you followed that last year or earlier this year, you can see some of the politics involved. I mean, a major reason why that decision was to pull back in terms of our flexibility was to force Nashville and Memphis back to in-person school. Because Nashville and Memphis pretty much all year did not. And so by them changing that rule in April, it forced them back in person. Well, that ended up impacting the whole state, where now Knox County schools, which did both last year and wanted another year of flexibility so we could smooth out the system, weren't allowed to do that, right? Because of the politics of trying to force the hand of somebody else.
Right. And again, yeah, absolutely. Because like I know, I think it was Shelby County is suing the governor.
Yes.
For the opt-out part of the thing. And it's like, I don't care what's going on in Memphis. It's a cool town. Don't get me wrong. I'm not hating on Memphis, but what they're doing in their schools, and this is a broader conversation about schools, I guess, that I've been having a lot. It's like I have zero desire or zero interest in what Memphis does with their schools.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see a net gain in having a Knox County kid and a Shelby County kid graduating from high school being looked at as the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see that as a net gain. Sure, there should be some base criteria because you're getting to stand from the state of Tennessee, but I don't care how Shelby does their district. If it works better to do more virtual stuff with them and their students do better and their community rises on it, and we don't do that here and we like what we're doing and it works for us, who cares?
Yeah.
And having the state come in and do what they did because of, like you said, the political reasons for, I don't know. It's one of my Governor Lee things that I don't like. It's like, I'm all about, local government until you don't do what I want.
Right.
And it's like, well, then you're not really about local government. You're just about.
Well, and I think people make the same argument about his, Executive Order 84 is that, if he really wanted it to be in the hands of local government, he would have let school boards across the state make the decision. But instead, he said, "Oh, you can make the decision, but I'm going to opt everybody out who wants to."
Right.
So, I mean, in effect, he took it out of local government's hands.
Right. So. Well, but I mean, like, if you want to get real, way down the rabbit hole on that, I mean, he put it in the parents' hands, theoretically.
Yeah. Right. And then you get into
which, generally speaking, I'm pro that conversation, but it really gets into then you hamstring anything from anybody being able to do anything at that point.
Sure.
Oh, that was fun. I lost the train of thought. I was so deep into that thing. But again, okay. So going back, it's like I don't. I want to know where we're going. Like, I mean, I got a rising middle schooler.
Mm-hmm.
And we're looking down the road of, that reminded me of a better one. Redistricting's happening. How deep are you in on that conversation?
Not very deep.
I know you and Virginia are clashing about West. I heard that story.
I don't think so.
Not clashing. I know Virginia was concerned that she might lose West.
Yeah,
and it would go to you if it.
Yeah,
it did.
and I think she has. I mean, I think she's got reason to be concerned in that. I don't think it's helpful to any school board member to not have a high school or a middle school in their district. I mean, and there's not near as many of those to go around as elementary schools. One of the things that Virginia actually mentioned at our retreat, which I think is an interesting idea, and I'm not sharing anything that's not public knowledge, I don't know if it was written about or not, is, she lifted up the idea of us having shared representation across school board districts.
Because I think realistically, there's, regardless of political districting, you're going to have a significant number of, I live in District 3, but my kids go to school in District 4. It doesn't. I mean, because unless we redistrict specifically around school districts,
right,
we're always going to have
it's
a
one
good
of
amount of overlap.
It's one of the numbers that I'm interested in is how many people who live in District 3, where I'm at, don't have kids who are zoned in District 3, and how many people who don't live in District 3 do, right?
Right.
Because only people who live in District 3 can vote for me or not. But there's a tremendous amount of kids who are impacted by things I may do in District 3 who don't live there. So to me, that's one of the reasons why Virginia was lifting that up, is this idea of possibly shared representation where maybe, 2 or 3 of us are helping represent the needs of a whole different communities where we're sharing that load. And then you got Evity in District 1 who currently has got 15 schools, and I've got 6 in mine. Right. So she's got a tremendous amount. She's got way more administrations that she's trying to work with to help elevate their concerns than I do. So,
yeah, again, like, it makes sense. Like a year or so ago, which was, I guess it was pre-census. So we were talking about like our predictions for what the census was going to show and stuff like that. And then the conversation of gerrymandering or redistricting came up. Because the census was a topic, and it's like, that makes sense to me. I mean, I say it as a joke before, but it makes sense to me to use school districting as the basis for our political districting, because it's going to give you all your polling stations, and it's going to give you at least some level of a community fixture to base your politics around.
Right.
Like, I know that my school, and even if I don't have kids, but I know that the school around the corner is the center of this subsection of politics in town. I think it makes sense, and it takes it potentially could take a lot of or at least a portion of the gerrymandering out, because you can't, like, Rocky Hill doesn't care what my political affiliation is.
Yeah, I don't think that would ever happen until there's more equal representation in the redistricting committee. So right now, every county commissioner is on that committee, and then just our board chair at the school board. So, we have very little influence right now in the way the redistricting is actually going to shake out.
Right. And see, I guess this is an important part. I apologize for interrupting, but I think this is an important part to talk about in the redistricting, because when I was looking at countywide redistricting, initially all I was thinking about was county commission.
Right.
And at the end of the day, you could manipulate the districting however you want to. It's not going to change a significantly Republican county commission. We'll go to a crazy would get down to like a 7-4, but I don't even think that would happen. I think we would take the 9-2 we have and maybe get to an 8-3, or more than likely, because of the makeup, would get to a 10-1.
Right.
But I didn't consider the school board as part of that conversation when I was having that part of it. So at least for county's sake, I don't think redistricting matters, really.
Right.
And so I guess to me the real the logical argument would be to talk about school boards as the main factor in what we're redistricting by.
Yeah, I agree, and I think currently the biggest concern that people are trying to figure out who are looking at the redistricting is, there's I think it's federal statute that says that you cannot impact a minority held district, which right now District 1 is their only minority held district in terms of they have the majority of the voting block. And so the trick is District 1's got to change by, I can't remember exactly how many it is, 3,000 or so people population wise. There's not enough African Americans in other surrounding districts to do that easily, to be able to keep 50% plus of minority representation in that district, which we have to do by federal
right.
statute.
Which I get it, and I understand where it came from, but I also think it's I wish to be able to honestly say that shouldn't be part of that shouldn't matter and need to be part of the conversation anymore. I think that might be a little bit naive to actually mean that when I say it,
right.
But I think it's kind of, I wish we were past that point.
Well, look at the impact of it. So on school board, okay, so District 1 on school board is the only district in Knox County School Board history that's ever had a minority school board member, and there's only been 3 of them. So Sam McKenzie, he was on there 20-something years, Gloria Deathridge, and now Evity, right? Mm-hmm. So what you would think then is, to your point, well, if it doesn't matter anymore, then we should see other minority candidates and elected school board members in other districts. Because certainly we have people who are Black and Latinx and others living in other communities outside of District 1. But one of the reasons why I think that district has been able to stay with a minority representative is because, like it or not, that's the majority of the voting block. And it does still impact our politics.
Right, but that's yeah, right. But that sadly that runs the assumption that because the majority of the voters look the same, for lack of a better word, they're going to vote by what they're looking at, not what the person is. And it works either way. I mean, it works. It works. Out here in District 4, it's a white lady. Most of District 4 are white people.
Right.
And it's a strong assumption to say that that's the reason people. Well, it didn't matter because they were voting between.
Well, but also
white
too,
people,
you don't have very many minority candidates that even run in other districts,
right?
So you can't elect a minority candidate if a minority candidate's not going to run.
And it comes right, and we can't. It's hard to run the statistics on. We'd have to find historical precedent for whether that mattered. But then even then, you sound like you're going to go and poll people and be like, "Hey, did you not vote for that black lady because she was black?" You're not going to say yes to that. Well, some might, but most of them won't.
Yeah, I mean, depending on how far back you go, people might have been willing to say that.
Right.
Versus,
I mean, I don't know. It's 2021. I think we've reverted to some of that being right out in the open again. But I don't know. It's a bummer. That just bums me out. But yeah, okay. So, but I think I'm gonna have to put some thought into to redistricting with a focus on how the schools are impacted more than the county, because like I said, I think the county commission doesn't change functionally.
Yeah, and I don't know that the county commission, and I'm not faulting them for this, I don't think they're considering to a high degree the school system and how it might impact it, for the sheer fact that one of the very first things they did was put all the county commissioner houses on the redistricting map so they would know if maybe they're pulling somebody out of their district.
Right.
The school board houses were not put on there until we asked. Right? So,
Well, I mean,
and again, I'm not faulting them for that. I'm
Right.
just saying that's not the lens in which they're looking through.
Right, and I think until like 3 weeks ago when the mass debate got super hot, that the election record shows the same for the general population as far as how much they care or pay attention to the school boards.
Sure.
Because I mean that's been one of my as I've gotten to meet you guys and talk to more school board and pay more attention to school board stuff, the apathy in regards to voting for school board is probably the most frustrating election conversation I think I can have locally.
Right.
I don't know. The city council is pretty rough too if you get down to the math of it. But
so let me ask you a question. You may know. So right now, I think there's only candidates coming in, non-incumbents for one seat in school board up for this coming year. District 7. I think there's 3 candidates that have said. Patty Bounds has said she's not running again publicly. And there's 3 candidates in that seat. Have you heard of any other?
I haven't gone down that
candidates?
road yet. Like I'm actively stopping 22 ballot conversation because again, I think this. I'm not even a city resident, but I think the lack of the apathy in city elections is a problem.
Yeah.
And to confuse that with things that are a year away, I think not neglectful is not the right word. I'm failing on a good word, but I think it's a misuse of time and energy.
Sure.
To give 22 stuff conversation. Like I met ex-sheriff Jimmy at the 4th of July parade, and I was like, "Hey, do this podcast. Why don't you come on?" He's like, "Sure. When do you want to do it?" And I was like, "After November."
Right. Right.
Because I don't like. Because I think it's. I think, and I was one of those people that I see the road signs, I see the yard signs, and that's what reminds me that I need to vote. And
Right.
I may do a Scotia research on who the road signs I've seen, because I can't count the number of times when I've gone into the ballot box, and I'm looking for names that I saw,
Right.
and they're not on my ballot.
Sure.
And I think Sheriff Jones being an example currently is that people went into the primary for city, and I guarantee you, and Chris Davis could probably attest to it and tell me that whether it actually happened or not. But I would bet that there were people that were let in there looking for him on the ballot.
Right.
And it's a year and a half away.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't do us. And so yes, the 60-something item ballot of 22 is going to be an issue that I'm going to try to get as many people on as I can.
Sure.
Once we get rolling. But I mean, really, it's like not till February do we get a realistic list of who's actually doing it.
Oh yeah.
And so I've got February to May for that primary. And in a lot of districts in Knox County, at least, the primary is more important than the general.
Sure.
And again, it's an August general, which I didn't realize those were what we did here in the county until a year ago.
Right.
And so I'm looking forward to it just because it's going to give me a ton of content, but I'm also scared to death of it because it's going to be massive. I've got a buddy of mine who's a lawyer that we've done a couple of shows with. And once we start getting some of the names of some of the judges and clerks and stuff like that, they're on that ballot. I'm going to sit down and do a show with him about like what that actual job is. Because again, like that's one of the core things for me. It's like, what is the job? Like we elect these, we are the hiring manager, but we don't know the job we're hiring for. And I think we continue to do that, and we continue to roll down. And I think that's what leads into the partisanship and stuff like that. Because it's easier just to say red team,
right,
and then just be done, and you don't have to think about it. And it's like it doesn't matter that this judge we're hiring has a record of throwing people in jail for decades for X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, that method we default to is pretty convenient. So,
right, and it's convenient for them, and depending on all the other things, for certain people, it's convenient for their political careers and stuff like that moving forward. And I think it's unfortunate. We don't that's my favorite thing about Eddie Manis is he is not he does not fit properly in the party box. And he's getting in trouble for it, which is fun for me to watch and fun for me to talk about. But I think that should be the more norm than the rarity. Like I think it's unfortunate that it's like, well, somebody told me this, and I can't remember who, and maybe they told me in confidence, so I shouldn't remember who. Is that the reason the party didn't like Eddie Manis is because they didn't know what he was going to do. And it's like, well, then why are we voting for Eddie Manis? Just red guy, right? And then be done with it. That's not how this. That's not how I think this thing is supposed to work. It's how it's working. But anyway, back to school stuff. We got off on stuff. So again, it's the future stuff. This COVID thing's gonna pass. We're gonna go to some sense of new normalcy. Again, I think budget. I think the budget thing has become more frustrating to me as I understand it a little better. Not great as far as how much we and our neighbors are being taxed on, and then how much of our local tax revenue is going back into that, where our neighbors aren't doing the same.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a state legislature issue more than it's a school board issue. But like, how do we? Because I'm assuming that there is a coalition of there's a coalition of the major school boards, right?
Yes.
And so I'm assuming that's a topic that's talked about in those conversations. Are you, is that a committee that you're part of? Is it a committee? How's that work? Maybe
Well,
that's a better way to ask it.
our liaison to that group actually on our board is Jennifer Owen. So she right now is our the one that's tied most in directly to legislation issues. And I think every Friday that group has a call, and she's on that. So you should bring Jennifer in and talk some about those specifics. But
we can call it right now. No,
the BEP I think is a consistent concern about from those groups for sure.
Yeah, I mean I think it's one of those, like, I don't know. This is what drives me crazy, and I think it was when I had Jennifer on last. Like, I would like to see a budget breakdown on a per student as well as a per county resident.
Okay.
So we could see so we got the total whatever, and it's like, and then broken down on some of the, not like super details like how much we spend on a pencil per kid, but at least like supplies, facilities, staffing, and then I'd say we break up staffing into
so that's
a couple more than two, because there's two major categories. It's certified and classified.
Yeah. So that's one of the things I've been pushing on is a per pupil basis, and you'll see some of that in our upcoming budget communications that are going to be going out to the public.
I look forward to that.
And a major reason for that is, one, it helps the numbers become much more appreciable to the general public. I mean, the general public, I don't have much of a concept for $500 million, right? And so when I start thinking about, all right, in instruction, how much are we spending per pupil versus facility versus per central office, for instance, people often complain about how much we spend on central office, but you know how much we spend on central office on a per student basis? About $4.
Right.
So we spend about $4 per student per year on central office on average. But what we're spending in total,
right? But then you could skew the numbers even better because you do it per resident, and it's like 37 cents or something like that. Quick math.
Yeah. So but what we're spending per kid in total education is about $9,000 on average, right? So it's relatively a drop in the bucket, which means you can spend a lot of time arguing about the central office stuff, or you can really try to figure out what to do with that other $8,996. Right. And maximize that. So.
Right. And what the state does, like 7,200 of that 9.
I think that's about right. Yeah.
And again, like, I think it's it's real easy as a parent to forget about, or let me correct my statement. It's really easy as a parent with two fairly normal kids that don't have any special needs or anything like that to forget about the expenses that go along with some of those programs that we have.
Sure.
Because we have 3 schools that are fully dedicated to special needs.
Oh, so you're talking about like Ridgedale and KAEC. So we have we have another school like Paul Kelly, which is not necessarily for special needs, but it's for kids who are kind of, they've got to do some different things to actually graduate, right? So it's a lot of getting those graduation credits done. So yeah, we have a few programs like that. One of the things that people I don't think know is that in 2018, the federal government changed the law for the first time, where school districts now have to report school spending on a school basis. So we've been tracking outcomes on a school basis for some time in terms of federal law. So as of 18, for the first time in our history, we can correlate spending to outcomes at a school basis.
And they're probably inverse too, right?
Well, no. So here's what's interesting is there's data that Edgeonomics out of Georgetown has pulled, and they've done a scatter plot of the state of Tennessee, and you can drill down to Knox County. And so if you look at that scatter plot, you'll have high spending, high outcomes, high spending, low outcomes, right? So you have all 4 quadrants. What you would think is low spending would equate to low outcomes, and high spending would equate to high outcomes. But if you look at that scatter plot in Knox County, we have schools in all 4 quadrants.
Right.
Also, our lowest funded school in Knox County is about $5,000 per student, and our highest funded school in Knox County is about $15,000 per student. So it's a $10,000 swing. So the old argument of, hey, we just need to spend more money on our higher need schools is not the right argument,
Right.
because we actually are doing that.
All right, so I have a question on that, and
Yeah.
I don't know that you would know this, but if I understand it correctly, like we here at Rocky Hill, we have a strong PTO,
Right.
and we're a fairly affluent portion of the community or whatever,
Right.
and so like our PTO a couple years ago bought us a new basketball court.
Sure.
And if I understand it correctly, and I can't remember who I was talking to about it, is that the board does some offsetting to that, where the schools that don't have a strong PTO or don't have as much affluency locally to do projects like that, the board will make it up in some of their spending on that kind of thing. Is that fairly accurate?
We do try to make some of that more equitable. Now, there's some things that we don't do that on. So, like playgrounds, Knox County Schools doesn't fund any playgrounds.
Okay, but
unless it's a new school. If it's a brand new school, we will, but not replacement.
So the reason I asked that on the scatter plot, it would be do you know if that data was part of the conversation? Because it would theoretically be, because I know Virginia brought me some paperwork from the first time I had her, which I think Rocky Hill was like $6,500 per student, something like that. It was on the lower end of the spectrum. But how much is Rocky Hill community making up that 9,200 or so average per student?
So that data that I mentioned is only local, state, and federal dollars.
Okay.
It's not any outside money coming in.
Because again, not being the statistician myself, I think that it could change some of that data theoretically, because it's going to take the lower it'll take a portion of the lower spent higher outcomes and put them into the higher spent higher outcomes bracket.
It will, but so I went this past year to Georgetown and got my certificate in education.
I know, I saw the picture.
In finance. And one of the things that I learned in that is, so this is nationally. So nationally, those outside dollars coming in from communities is only about 2% of the pie. So it doesn't mean it's insignificant at a school level.
Okay.
But what it means is that's not where we need to focus our energy. We got to figure out how to maximize the other 98%. Because you're always going to have that outside money coming in. But I've heard people make the argument that, it tilts the scale so much toward one school. But the reality is it's a very small portion of the total
That's
pie.
good. That's very good. Okay, so then the question is, I guess then the logical follow-up question is that if it's not necessarily about money, then what is it about?
Well, I mean, to me, so if it's not about are we spending more in the areas that we need to spend, then it comes down to two other things. One is the pie itself big enough? Well, that's a point that I think people could argue, is maybe just the total education pie is not big enough. The other then, if the pie is big enough and you're allocating funds based on higher need schools, then the other question is that you have to default to is, but how are we spending it? And to me, that's where the conversation needs to go.
I think that's where the board probably has the most effective chance of doing something.
It does, but at least in my time there, we're not often into that level of conversation. So
all right, to back up just a second, because I thought of a question. It would have been handy if you would have brought this scatter plot with you. Does it?
I'll send it to you. I'll send you a link later.
Does it differentiate between by size of school, not school itself, but size of the school boards, size of the community that the schools are in? Like, because I could see that like a more rural district could very well have a very low input but a higher output. Because it's a much more rural.
You could figure that out with this data. I have not done that analysis. Okay. So the scatter plot I'll send you is all of Tennessee, but you can drill down by county. So you could pick any county and look at all their schools in that particular county and see it represented.
Okay, because again, like it just kind of dawned on me that by aggregating this data across the state or nationally, that there are particular places that do, because I know I can't remember which of the school board I was talking to was saying that like it was like Wyoming or something like that as a state spends the absolute least,
right? And
then Massachusetts spends by far the most.
I think that's right.
And the outcomes are about the same, and they're both a higher outcome state. Yeah. And so it's like, again, it's not necessarily the money thing. Okay, so on this, on the what we do with what we have part of the conversation. I don't know, what are you thinking? Where are some holes that need filled, or some changes need made to kind of maximize what we've got?
Yeah, so actually at our school board meeting on Wednesday, Evity, our vice chair, she's put in a new part of our workshop meetings, which she's calling a data moment, which I think is great. We need to be looking at more data as a school board. So the data that got presented at that meeting was our proficiency data. So it was a 4-year comparison. It didn't show 20 because we didn't have data from 20 because everybody was exempted from showing it. But it was total proficiency for all grade bands, okay? So what we've seen is obviously from 19 to 21 we lost, but what's really a sad commentary in that story is, so like, let's say for our African American students, we dropped from 3% of our African American students mastering on the proficiency scale to 1%. Well, for one, it's only at 3% to start in 19 and dropping to 1%, right? Same thing if you look at our economically disadvantaged students. So I think I don't really believe in this.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but like, how much does that overlap?
How much? Oh, in terms of the economically disadvantaged and the African American. So the particular graphs that they showed that night didn't show the overlap.
Okay.
So I don't know the answer.
And that's an assumption on my part, and I don't mean it to be racist at all, but it's just it's a reality. Like what I know, some of the city council candidates are talking about 50% of the African American community in Knoxville is below poverty.
Below poverty line. Yeah. Yes. Yep.
So I mean, I would assume that they overlap somewhat.
Yeah,
if not significantly.
Yeah, I would be certain that they do. So our group in Knox County that's doing the best is our Asian population, and they're doing about, I think it's about 10 points better than the white population of students. So if you believe in a zero-sum game, which I don't, then what you believe is that if we put a lot of energy into our students who need it the most, so our minority students, ELL students, economically disadvantaged students, then somehow our other students are going to start missing out. I don't buy into that. And so I think what we need to do is get really creative and start thinking about what are we going to do differently to help the tide rise for those students, because when we do, what you'll see gains for the whole district. I'm positive of that. But I don't think we've been willing to rock the boat enough in terms of the types of things that we're doing.
Well, again, the question to me, and this is, again, me not understanding how the separation of state and local goes, like how much can we do before we start having pushback, for lack of a better word, from the state?
Yeah, so some of it is how your distributions happen at a state level. And so one of the things that we don't do in our state is we don't fund, we don't have a student-centered funding model, which means that you give more money to more discretion at a school level for that school to spend in a way to affect those particular students. Uh-huh. What we do in the state of Tennessee is, so like Knox County Schools is able on with an algorithm say, all right, well, this school based on its ADM, so how many students it has, average daily membership, this is how many teachers you get, this is how many admins you get, this is how many, right, all the things.
Right.
And then the principal has some flexibility within that, but it's all based on a formula. And so what people have learned is that those states who are spending their money or allocating it in a student-centered model, their outcomes are better. So I think that's one of the conversations we need to have at state level is not just the BEP and how much funding and how is it distributed, but can we move to more of a student-based funding model where there's more discretion at the local school level to get more creative about that particular population?
Yeah, I mean, I that falls within my realm of things I like, because I would rather have it here where we can adjust to what we have in front of us. Like I need to do the math on it. I'd just like to see. I would like to see just a fixed percentage of the sales tax. So we have a state portion, a local portion, and then a schools portion, and then just do it like that. And then take out all the fluff. And if we have a really great year and we're selling a lot of stuff, then we have more money for the schools and we don't have to worry about it. Or we can get weed in here, and that's a whole separate thing. I don't need to go down that path. We do need to get weed in here. It's stupid that we're not, especially with funding being even remotely part of the conversation.
Right.
But I don't know. Like I go back and forth between full like nihilist in the situation and just like suffer through it, and we'll get my kids out of there, and I'll figure out what to do with them after that. or being hopeful for some actual positive change, because I think there's want, and I think if nothing else, is as broken and poor as the conversation is over the mask thing, there's interest in what's going on in the schools.
Well, there's some good things happening too that I don't think we've done enough to highlight yet. So I don't know how much you have followed the Ford innovation work that we're trying to do. Have you followed any of that?
I've heard the words, but I haven't seen anything past that.
Yeah, so Ford Innovation is a program that's working now in about, I think it's 40 different communities across the country. And we brought them, Knox Education Foundation helped us fund it. But it's this 5-step multi-year process to basically reimagine high school in a district, to where you have much more CTE programming in a school. You're able to potentially do an academy structure. You're working with local stakeholders in the community around business and industry to make sure that those educational programs in your high schools are really meeting the needs of the businesses in your community. So that way you keep more students local and they're not just leaving.
Right.
So I think a lot of the work that we're trying to do around that, and we haven't completely formulated our plan yet. We're just in step 2 of that process, out of a 5-step process. I think there's a lot of potential excitement and energy, and I think we had 7 schools sign on. So schools have to agree to be a part of this Ford Innovation work. And what do we have? 16 high schools, I think. So, I mean,
you should know. Come on, man.
Yeah, I think that's right. So half of our high schools have signed on to this, just at the ground pallet level. So.
All right, that's exciting. I think that's, again, it goes back to throwing some blame at the feet of the media and not spending time on some of this stuff. I think there is as I understand it, there's a number of pretty positive, good things that we are doing or trying to do or working on doing that just gets zero coverage. Right. Because people standing on the sidewalk in front of their schools yelling at the principals while their kids are walking in is more exciting news. Right. And it doesn't help it's not going to help move the ball forward. No, it's not. So
there will be a day that we're past mask, and do we want to look back at this time and say, look at all the time we wasted? Or was that just the noise and we kept moving forward to what we need to be doing?
And like I said, that's kind of how I sit on it. It's just like, this is just background noise. It's just stuff. We're going to deal with it. And the reality, whether it's a masking or some other issue, there's going to be people that don't like it. Yeah. And we have to figure out a way to serve the end goal, which again is one of my bigger issues with schools in general. It's like, because again, I asked Eddie Manis about it. I was like, because he's on the education committee there, and it's like, is there a stated goal of what that committee wants a high schooler to be, wants a graduate from a Tennessee school to be? Right. Is there a stated goal there? Like, I understand we have our little TCAPs and all that kind of, we have benchmarks and stuff like that, but is there a stated goal? It's like, let's draw a picture of a Tennessee grad. And it's like, not really. There's not.
Well, the term that they're using at a state level now is called ready graduate. So that's the official term. And so that's one of the things that Knox County Schools and every district in our state has to assess itself by, is how many students do we have as ready graduates.
I need to look that up because I need to find the details on what that actually means, because I'd probably argue with them being valid. Because again, like, I mean, I've told this story a couple times, but like, as an employer, one of the most frustrating things to me about younger employees are soft skill stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, I get it. We don't write checks anymore, but I do, and I need staff that can. Right. And it's not like 1,000 checks a day or anything, but just the simple, you write this part here and you write this thing here and you date it and you sign it. Like it really blew my mind when I had an employee go, I don't know how to, what? Like, I was busy with somebody else and a vendor came in. I was like, just write him for a check, write a check for that on the bottom or whatever. It's like, I don't know how to do that. Right. And then showing up on time, all the little stuff. Like, I don't know. That's, all right. So my final thing, cause I got to get out of here, cause I got to pick up my kids from school, is, I want a unified, countywide informational distribution system, communication system that's not, like, this drives me crazy. And I have 2 kids in the same school. And I have right now 3 different modes of communication, not including phone calls. Okay. And so it's like, some email, some use the Class Dojo thing. We had school messenger.
Oh, you're talking about it. So I've different teachers at a class level.
Right. I've had 6 different, like, over the 6 years we've been at Rocky Hill, there's almost every year I get some new thing that we're using, but it's only one teacher, not the other teacher. Sure. And so, like, I'm not looking forward to next year when I have kids in different schools. And then I have to try to balance all that stuff. And so, like, that's a want for me, is to have some sort of universal Like every teacher, like every school uses the same thing. All the teachers use the same thing, so that as a parent, I can keep up with stuff. Because like I get so much junk.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I figured it out finally how to get him to quit calling, but whenever Bob sends out an email,
Right.
I get a text that says check your email, and
Right.
then I get the email.
Right.
I used to get a phone call that said check your email.
Right.
But I figured out how to get out of that one. But you know, it's just like which I don't know. It's just it piles up with all the different stuff and all. Like I mean, like I have a dedicated email just for my kids' stuff, like just for school and just
Right.
for like we do scouts and stuff like that. And so I have a dad of my kids' names at Gmail, and like that thing I can't like of all my emails, which I have like 8 different email addresses. That one email box is always like 80 plus in. Like there's always like 80 or 90 things
Right.
in there just constantly.
Right.
And so that's a request for me.
Okay, I got
right,
you.
So anything, any last things before
I'm
we
gonna
call
go, I'm gonna go fix that tomorrow.
Yes.
So appreciate that.
That's the power of the show.
That's
what
right.
we do. Is there anything else you want to do before we get out of here?
Yeah, I just want to turn people's attention to that school board superintendent or this superintendent search. I mean, there's not a lot of public action around that now, but when it starts happening, make sure you lift your voice up, because I think the school board as a whole is going to want to try to understand what the priorities are from the community. So take advantage of that.
Cool. All right. I'm gonna do the outro and post because I got to run and get the kids right now. All right. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate you coming. We'll do it again.
All right. Thanks.
All right, later.